Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. It's got to be 5 o'clock somewhere. But welcome to our next lightning interview, Confident Data Science with Adam Ross Nelson. My name is Alex Landa, and I'm the head of content here at ODSC. As always, we want to make these sessions interesting and interactive, so please introduce yourself in the chat channel. Give us your name, job title, where you're tuning in from, whatever you feel like sharing. And of course, feel free to add any questions you might have to the conversation. We'll be sure to answer them throughout the rest of the interview. And as a reminder, we do have a number of upcoming webinars in the near future, so more interviews, more tutorials, guides, etc. They'll be interesting. We also have ODSC West coming up quite soon. It'll be October 30th to November 2nd in San Francisco or virtually. And with that event, we will also have the AIX Business and Innovation Summit, focused more so on the user side of things. And right now, West is 50% off. We are expecting 250 plus speakers, almost 200 different training sessions and workshops across 12 tracks. And we're going to be doing a bigger focus on large language models, generative AI, things like that this year. So it'll be a really good time to check it out. And we're going to be doing some really interesting extra events this year, too. I'm personally excited for our Halloween party. We're finally doing one of those. But I digress. Now it's time to get the party started with Adam Ross Nelson. Can bring him up. There we go.
Hi.
Now, hey, Adam. So Adam has spoken for us before, but for those of you who didn't get a chance to look at his first interview, then here's a bit more about him. Adam is a data scientist and data science career coach, most known as the author for How to Become a Data Scientist, a guide for established professionals. As a career coach, Adam helps established professionals transition into and level up in data careers. Earlier in his career, he was the inaugural data scientist at the Common Application, which provides undergraduate college application platforms for institutions around the world. He completed his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis. And today we are here to talk about Confident Data Science, which is also the title of Adam's new book that we'll touch upon a little bit more later. So there we go. There we go. Adam, thank you very much for joining. Is there anything I missed about yourself?
No, nothing important, I'm sure. I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Alex. Glad to be back.
It is a pleasure. So for this interview, we're going to be talking something about a little more specific. Last time we talked about data science careers and switching into it, even in 30s and 40s. But just as the title of your book is Confident Data Science, we want to talk about that. So what exactly is Confident Data Science?
You know, I've put a lot of thought into that, not only because of the book itself. When Kogan Page reached out to me last summer, actually, about this time last summer, to do this book, I thought to myself, well, what exactly is Confident Data Science? And one of the things to know, probably that makes sense, helps make sense of the title, is this book is part of a series. You can find other books in the series. There's a Confident UX book, a Confident Coding book, and then my book is the Confident Data Science book. But I put some thought into that, and also because of your question. And I think Confident Data Science connects really well with the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the work is done with 20% of the tools. So in data science, we have we have many common tasks, challenges, use cases, or data science presents a full range of solutions, all of which, or 80% of which, let's say, can be serviced by 20% of the tools, 20% of the knowledge associated with data science. And then data scientists have to specialize a little bit above and beyond that 20%. But no one data scientist, no single data scientist could ever know 100% of the field. And I think that's true for many fields, right?
Right.
So confident data science is acknowledging this 80-20 rule, acknowledging this 80-20 dynamic. There's a couple more aspects of it that I think we'll get to as well. But that's where the conversation starts. Just knowing that data science is a very diverse field, that there's room for many from many paths, with many backgrounds, with many interests. And no one data scientist could ever know the entire field. That's confident data science.
Knowing what you know and doing it well.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, doing that really well.
No, I mean, with the amount of frameworks out there, of course, you can't specialize in all of them. There's, of course, the famous dilemma of what language you want to use, what specialization. You know, you can't be a master of everything NLP and everything data viz and etc. So if you can only do 20% of things, do it well.
Yeah. You know, we could elaborate on that. The language example is a really good one. And there's the classic question is, should I learn R or Python? And I know plenty of data scientists who have never touched a lick of R in their life, but they're gurus in Python,
Mhm.
and vice versa. And you don't need both to be a confident data science. Maybe it's helpful to know both. In fact, it is helpful to know both, to be honest about that. But you don't need to know both. You can be a confident data scientist with one or the other.
Right. And I'm sure there's people from each camp who will say which one is better, but you know
Do we
what?
want to start a fight? Risk starting a fight in the chat, a turf war on which is the better one to learn. Now I'm looking at the chat over here, and I hope we don't start something.
Oof. Okay, we'll save that for a future debate, maybe. I think we only have so much time today. We're here to talk about responsible things and confident AI. But so, you know, you wrote a book about this, and it said like you were approached about it. So what problems have you seen that you wanted to solve when you were writing this book?
Ooh, I'm so glad you asked that, because I saw a problem in the data science publishing world probably a couple years ago. And I write about it in the book, by the way. I write about this experience in the book where I went to my bookshelf. I'm a big fan of books, and I hope that many of the folks joining us today are book fans. If you have a favorite book, throw that in the chat. And Deepti shared a link to this book just now as well. But the problem was this: I went to my bookshelf and I pulled roughly 10 books from my bookshelf, all on data science. Some of them were very broad data science, some of them were very specific to an industry. And then I combed through the appendices, the indices, and the glossaries, and I looked for ethics. And would you believe only 2 books of the 10 mentioned or discussed ethics in any meaningful, substantive, deep way? 2 out of 10. So I knew that there was an opportunity to actually, that was well before I started chatting with publishers about this book. I knew then if I ever wrote a book that I would work to correct that and bring put a book together that was more intentional about centering ethics, responsibility, trustworthiness in the book, throughout the book, and infused throughout the book. So the other thing I did for this book is I actually have a section. One of the problems that I solved, one of the sections in the book is rewriting the history of data science. A lot of folks will point back to the mid 1990s as some of the origins of data science, and some of the first folks who put data science, who really invented data science. But I point to Ada Lovelace, Florence Nightingale in the 1800s. And if you've never read about Ada Lovelace, she lived in like the 1820s, 30s, 40s. I forget her exact birthday and birth year and death year, but if you read her journal, she was essentially writing about generative AI in the 1800s. She wrote about how she was working with Charles Babbage, She was working with Charles Babbage on the computing engine, which was an early computer by many views. And Ada Lovelace is often credited as being the first computer scientist, because she is often credited with being the first to write a computer algorithm. And in her journal, she writes about how the computer, it wasn't called a computer back then, it was called an analytical engine. She wrote about how the analytical engine might be able to compose music.
Mhm.
And that's generative AI.
Right.
So that was another problem I solved with this book, is I believe I've reintroduced some of the less well represented but highly important characters in the history of the field.
Right. I mean, no field is just a couple decades old. You know, even if we talk about generative AI being not even a year old at this point, well, you just kind of disproved that it's 200 years old, almost.
Mm-hmm.
But so a question I do have that, you just name dropped responsible AI, trustworthy AI, things like that. How does the term confident data science differ from responsible AI or trustworthy AI?
Well, to be a confident data scientist, at least the way I framed it in this book and the way we're framing it for this interview, that 80-20, I could go back to that 80-20 rule.
Mhm.
So a big proportion of the 20% of the skills that you need to do 80% of the work is going to include practical, ethical, best practices, let's say.
Mhm.
And I can give you an example. So a good data scientist, a confident data scientist, will have specific pragmatic steps that they introduce in their work that are designed to prevent ethical dilemma, designed to solve ethical dilemma, and designed to alleviate the risks associated with ethical dilemma. And one of the best ways, so a very specific example is at the beginning of any analysis, something very simple any data scientist can do, or analyst, or ideally, this is something a team will do as part of the team's culture or the organizational culture, is just ask, what if the results of our analysis are unflattering for us? What if the results of our analysis make us look bad? What will we do? How will we proceed? And having had that conversation at the beginning of the project, or frequently during the project, will make the process simpler if and probably when you find results that are unflattering, if and when you find results that don't cast you or your organization in the best light possible. So instead of the conversation being something like, oh no, what do we do now? The conversation is, oh wow, look at this result. This is not what we expected. This isn't what we wanted. This doesn't make us look very good, but we have a plan in place. We know exactly how to proceed and exactly how to move forward. And then you can, dare I say, confidently move forward with those plans.
So you're talking about owning it instead of shying away from it. So
Yes.
maybe you're given a data set which might have an inherent bias, for example, which we shouldn't have those data sets in the first place, of course, but sometimes they happen.
Yep.
So you're talking about, instead of saying ignore that, it's owning it and saying, here's what we can do with this instead, and here's how we can do better moving forward.
Yep. Yes. Owning it, anticipating it, planning for it, and distributing and sharing the responsibilities for correcting those issues.
No, that sounds good. I mean, I feel like any field or industry, a lot comes from just owning it. And shying away from it doesn't make you look good no matter what.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
So, as you know, I do want to talk about prompt engineering, but before we get into that, we have a question from Steven on LinkedIn.
Oh.
How do you handle the annotation aspect? And what sort of annotation issues do you face as a data scientist?
Ooh, I'll have to. I may have to punt just a little bit on this, and maybe
Mhm.
Stephen can give a clarification here. I'm wondering if Stephen's talking about the annotations on a data visualization, or potentially annotations on a record, data record in a data set. Um, so actually, let me before I make too many guesses about what the broader context of the question is. Let me just see if we can't ask for an elaboration on that question, because that could take us in a couple different directions, and I want to make sure that we answer the question at hand.
Sure. So, Stephen, if you're still paying attention, we will keep an eye out for that clarified question.
And we
Put
might be
in.
able to follow up in the comments after the show as well.
Yep, that works too. Yeah, that was on LinkedIn, so we can always go to that post and follow up directly there. So, one of the things you and I have been talking about in recent weeks has been prompt engineering.
Yeah.
And that's been a huge thing that I've been writing about, reading about. It is one of the hottest jobs right now. And I definitely think it relates to confident data science because generative AI is such a big topic when it comes to responsible AI, confident data science. So many new questions have come out of it, such as where the data is coming from, copyright issues, bias in training data, things like that. And the reason I bring up this particular job is I was looking at Indeed last week, and there were over 3,000 jobs already that mentioned prompt engineering.
Yeah.
And some of those were directly the title of AI prompt engineer, NLP engineer, which had a big focus on prompt engineering. And a year ago, there was none of this. Prompt engineering, I don't even think was a
Oh,
term a year ago.
no, I don't think so.
You know, even if LLMs have been around longer, generative AI is super new.
Yeah.
So,
The first real, because I was watching the job boards too, the first job with ChatGPT in the job title that I found was January.
even that is super early because
Yeah.
the general person knew about it pretty quickly. I still remember using it late last year and, of course, early this year. But it's impressive that someone was savvy enough to actually pick that up and say, this is going to be a big thing. Let's get on it.
Yeah, in
Um,
January. So just a few months after ChatGPT came out.
all right. They are a trend spotter, I see.
Yeah.
So, so before I get to my next question, I do have a question for the audience. If you have started a job in prompt engineering, or you're looking at it or using it, leave a comment about your experience. I'd love to hear what anyone has been doing in prompt engineering. I know a friend of mine just got a job as a prompt engineer, which is exciting. And so I'm curious for you, Adam. What are some ways that you can incorporate confident data science specifically with generative AI and prompt engineering now that everybody knows what these things are? AI isn't just some programmer in the back office anymore. We know it. We all see people using prompts and things like that now.
I would point to the notion for prompt engineering, which I think is a different job than data science. And um, we were struggling when you and I were talking about this, right? We were struggling with this topic because it's so new. It's
Mhm.
hard to say too much definitive. But one of the things I feel fairly strongly about that we can say confidently, I feel like we've picked a word there to really hit hard, that we can say confidently is that one of the similarities between data science and prompt engineering is that they are both team sports. In other words, to be a really good data scientist, you need collaborators.
Mhm.
To have a really good data science team, you need the team aspect with different types of contributors. on the team for an organization to do good data science work. I believe the very same is true, maybe even more so true for prompt engineering. A prompt engineer can't do prompt engineering, the field is evolving and the field is so new. I believe, and again, I think it'd be so nice to hear from folks in the chat about their own experiences, but it's hard to imagine a prompt engineer doing their work in isolation without input from many others in that team aspect.
So you could see this as not necessarily replacing a data scientist, both, but two members of the same team, just as a marketing team.
I think that's a reasonable way
the
to think
writing
about
side or the graphic side.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to think about it, especially with many of the questions we've been having in a variety of venues, whether generative AI might replace the work of data scientists, and given the team nature of both generative AI and data science, no, I don't see one replacing the other because of the team nature of the work.
No, that's good. I feel like there definitely can be a lot of skill set overlap. I know a lot of the jobs I've seen for prompt engineering might say knowing basics of programming, coding to go in and maybe fine tune some models, but it's a different skill set. It's totally different art. It's knowing how to use the models. It's making a program and using the program, essentially. So,
and not only that, one of the things that a prompt engineer will do, again, the field is so new, it's hard to speak authoritatively on exactly what a prompt engineer does. But one of the things I see even myself doing in my own prompt engineering work, but certainly in data science, is generating a variety of outputs, and then sharing those outputs with the team and saying, okay, help me understand which output is going to be the best output for our use case. Which prediction, which should we? So a good example in the data science world is if you're trying to generate a prediction, let's say we're trying to predict housing prices. That's a classic example, right? Do you predict that as an ordinal, low cost, moderate cost, high cost? Or do you predict that as a specific number, a dollar value? And you need the team's input to decide which prediction is going to be better for your use case.
Right. Yeah, I think we'll see these two jobs. We've definitely seen this, the arguments of, is generative AI going to replace data scientists? Is AI going to take my job? And at least for these two, I'm not seeing it so far. I've done plenty of research seeing how a data scientist can use AI, if anything, how someone in AI can just use more AI. It's great as a coding assistant, double check your work. Like, I'm a writer and I still use Grammarly, for example. I might miss something here and there. But it looks like we do have one person who has used generative AI or prompt engineering, from George, working on refining how models respond to specific testable conversations.
I like that.
That's cool.
I'd be really, and George or Jorge, if you have links to your work or anything that relates to your work, share that too. It'd be nice for the community to be able to see more about what you mean there.
And speaking of community, Stephen got back to us with the follow-up. To clarify on data annotation, I'm referring to the data set. How do you improve your labeled data, and what sort of common issues do you see in labeled data?
Well, I think the classic answer for this question is a solid, organizationally driven approach to data dictionary. Having a well-documented data model for your production data, and a well-documented model for your analytical data and how the production data maps over to your analytical data set, and then having a solid data dictionary. In fact, early in my career as a data scientist, I spent, and I think other data scientists in the crowd, you might be able to say in the chat whether you agree or disagree. Early data scientists, in some cases, end up spending much more time than they would like on documenting, or in Stephen's word, annotating the data set, to make sure that we know exactly what this column means, exactly what this column means, or if you have an ordinal, exactly what each ordered point on the scale means, or if it's a nominal, exactly what every nominal entry means. Yeah, as in data science, we spend more time on that than we would like to. We'd probably rather spend more of our time on actual data science. How do you improve your labeled data set? What sort of common issues do you see in labeled data? We could take that one in a variety of different ways. One of the things I've been puzzling over recently is, and actually it's a revision to the book. I would revise, there's a section in the book that I would revise. That's just the thing with books, they go out of date. There was a significant update to scikit-learn this last year, in fact. And I haven't done a thorough audit of how well I incorporated the most recent revisions and approaches to scikit-learn in this book. And that's just the nature of books. But one of the demonstrations I do in this book, for example, Stephen, is I demonstrate how to create dummy variables, a matrix of one-hot encoded dummy variables for a categorical. And I demonstrate with pandas. Pandas has a function for this. However, if I were to do that, if I were to rewrite that section today, I would for sure go with the scikit-learn dummy encoder. Because the scikit-learn dummy encoder is better at dealing with ambiguously labeled data, or unanticipated, or data that's nominal data that's been labeled in unanticipated ways. The scikit-learn dummy encoder for those specific nuances is probably a better choice than the pandas dummy encoder. So I'm not sure, actually, now that I think about it, Stephen, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I gave you an example of one issue. I don't know how common it is, but I gave you an example of one issue that I recently faced, making the choice between this tool or that tool. On a very surface level, they perform the same function, but under the hood, they operate quite differently and in ways that can have meaningful differences in your analysis.
All right, Stephen, hopefully that answered that question. And if you still have more questions, the chat will be open for a while still. So we'll be here to answer anything. But I do want to get to another tangential topic of maybe some specific examples of how people are confidently using AI. So we spoke a bit last week about how maybe I've used it for research, and you could use it as like a venting board. So, and this question can go to the community as well, of what are some ways that you've used AI in a confident and ethical and responsible manner? And that can be very broad, of course, but Adam, what are a few ways that you've used it or that you have seen others use it?
I love this topic because generative AI has solved for me one of the biggest problems that I face working as in large part as a solo consultant. If I do data science consulting work, I usually work as a solo. And then in my career coaching work, I have a very small team. I have a business manager. I have some fulfillment partners who help me with resume writing, social media profile revision, and things like that. But the problem is being on a very, very small team and then also working in isolation. The problem is getting feedback from others. And that's one of the things I do miss about working in for a larger organization, where there is no shortage of folks who can give you feedback. And if you're in some kinds of organizations, there's no shortage of feedback, which is another mixed blessing, right? So if I'm working on something, maybe I'm working on a paragraph, maybe I'm working on 2 or 3 paragraphs. I write it out myself. I'll hand it off to ChatGPT and I'll say, ChatGPT, I'm going to give you 3 paragraphs on whatever topic. Please read these paragraphs for me and tell me if there's anything you might add, anything you might change, or if there's anything that I've missed. And you can also ask more sophisticated questions. You can also ask, I've had success asking for the kind of feedback where you might even say, does this argument make sense? Or is there a way to be more persuasive here? You can also ask for different types of feedback. You can say, did I oversell this? Did I undersell this? And you get different types of results. And for anyone who's tinkered around with generative AI, I think you'll be familiar with the different types of results that you could get based on those different prompts. And I'm very happy for that. It has partially helped me satisfy my hunger for input. And so using an artificial intelligence, if that's what ChatGPT is, and even that's debatable, right? Using artificial intelligence to give me some input, I'm happy for that use case. So I'd be really interested in what other people have to say. And then you yourself, I know you and your team have maybe dipped your toes in the generative AI well of knowledge or well of resources.
We indeed have used it. I can happily say I haven't used it to actually write any blogs or social media copy or anything like that, because if it was that good, I wouldn't have a job here.
Yeah.
So thankfully, AI isn't there just yet. I know I've asked ChatGPT to test it out, write a blog about A, B, and C, keep it, let's say, 500 to 600 words, and it's not bad. It gets its job done, but I personally won't use it, or I won't copy and paste that in.
Sure.
But what I do find it really helpful for, and Bard's been great for this also, because I believe the training data is much more current than ChatGPT, which allows me to learn more about more recent topics.
Okay.
So if I am maybe doing an article on large language model ops, LLM ops, and if there's a term within that maybe I'm not super familiar with because there's so many new things to come out of generative AI, I can just straight up ask it, explain LLM ops to me like I'm 5.
Sure.
Because I can Google all these questions, what are LLM ops, what is generative AI, etc. And there's going to be a million different blogs or LinkedIn posts or videos describing all these things. And I'm sure they're all great, but at that point, your homework is just finding which one to start with. And then you have 20 tabs open, and they're kind of all saying the same thing or similar things. But Bard and ChatGPT, they can just summarize it. And now I'm not an expert in this, but if I have to write towards an audience, and because our audience are data scientists and AI practitioners, I can't speak to them like I'm 5, of course. Sure. But so that won't really work very well. But at least for me to understand, it's been very helpful. Also, creating outlines has been.
Oh,
great.
okay.
Oh, go on.
Yeah, I was about to ask about outlines. Perhaps I see Jorge in the comments on LinkedIn agreeing with you as letting generative AI be a source of research. I was about to ask, have you found utility? Because in your role at ODSC with the tasky stuff. So I know from my experience in writing blogs, or writing articles, I might not be happy with my title, or I might get feedback that says, "Are you sure this is the best title?" And for me, revising and coming up with a new title is pretty tasky. So I can give ChatGPT my original title and say, maybe a summary of my article, and say, "I need help with some ideas for different titles. Can you give me some different ideas for a title?" Very tasky way of getting some help from ChatGPT. And you just mentioned outlines. So are you using ChatGPT or Bard in those tasky ways?
Oh, absolutely. It's been especially helpful with outlines because historically what I would do, and I still do this to double check the work of ChatGPT and Bard, but if I'm working with one of my writers or a freelancer, and maybe I'm assigning them something a little more technical than what I personally am comfortable with writing, I can go to them and say, hey, I want to do this blog on 5 considerations for LLM ops. And I
Sure.
keep going back to this because this was a blog I recently outlined. And, it was able to provide, I think it started with 5 bullet points. And then from there, I was able to kind of go into each bullet point and say, like, okay, so one of the concerns is a cost, for example, of what tools, resources, etc. How many people might you need? And then from there, it kind of was helpful because I was able to go into Google at that point and ask, like, what costs are associated with LLM ops. So it
Okay.
kind of gave me the questions that I had to further dive into. Because if there's a topic you're not really familiar with, it's also really good because then it brings you more ideas and more questions because you don't always know the right questions to ask. And if you have a subject matter expert easily at your disposal, I can say, hey, Adam, I want to do this blog. I need to do it today. What should I talk about? But it's not that easy. Everyone's busy. Not everyone can just respond to a text instantly. So is the nature of asynchronous communication in 2023.
Sure.
But Bard and ChatGPT are right there for us to say, hey, what am I missing? What are some bullet points I can use? What are some questions? Or as Jorge's saying, providing context
Yeah.
that's super helpful and like you said with text and knowing the right audience for things like
Right.
that and saying, what am I missing?
I love that you brought up the notion of asking generative AI to help figure out what the question is. Because
Mm,
as a scientist, before I became a data scientist, I was I was doing econometrics, which is a different kind of science. But as a scientist, as a researcher, the task of figuring out exactly the right question, or figuring out exactly how to ask the question with just the right dependent variable and just the right independent variables, is not an insignificant challenge.
mm,
So I'm going to have to based on our conversation today, I'm going to have to put some more thought into how or if generative AI can be or should be helpful in the process of generating or refining research questions. So, and you brought up another topic earlier. If
mm,
we could circle back,
sure.
so I'm also an attorney. So in a former career, I was an attorney, and the following the legal developments around generative AI have been fascinating. In fact, I'll put in a plug for an episode of the Lightning Talks, I think maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago. If you're interested in that, a professor from, I believe, law professor, I can't remember what school, was with Seamus talking about some of
Mm,
the more prominent issues. And I think that show focused largely on the copyrightability um, of the outputs from generative AI, not just text, but also images. And the current thinking, sort of the leading thought, is that uh, outputs from generative AI raw outputs at the very least are probably not copyrightable.
Mhm.
Potentially outputs that have been revised and edited by a human may be copyrightable. And then also potentially the prompts that go into the generative AI engines may be copyrightable. So that's an interesting topic, and it's an important one for ethics, because one of the things I see folks doing is generating output, text, videos, images with generative AI, not fully disclosing the use of generative AI, and slapping copyright notices on that content. Now, potentially, it's not legal. It's actually potentially it's legally not possible to copyright those outputs. However, some folks may be, in that case, inappropriately claiming copyright. So there's a really important unsettled ethical issue that the creative industry is going to have to wrestle with. To what extent is the creative industry, is a creator obliged to disclose the use of a generative AI, and then also whether you can copyright. Another really important legal issue is, and this one is important, I think, from an educational perspective and also from an organizational perspective. As an organization, if you're going to adopt generative artificial intelligence and you're going to say that generative artificial intelligence is going to be a part of our tool set, we're going to use it to generate content, text, images, and videos, beware, because if generative AI has a hallucination, and for example, if I went to ChatGPT and I said, tell me a paragraph about Alex, and if the paragraph came out that said something unflattering about you that was also untrue, now we're in the territory of defamation. And it is currently unsettled from a legal perspective who's responsible, if anybody, for that defamation. Is the creator of the model? Is the people who are responsible for the input that trained the model responsible for that defamation? Is the person who created the prompt responsible for the defamation? Is the model itself responsible? Is it a mixture of all of the above, or is it something else entirely? And this is not a hypothetical, folks. Around the world, there are multiple pending defamation claims that are centered on AI-generated content in world courts.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but I did want to bring up an example on that. There's lawsuits popping up all the time. There was actually a story earlier this year about a mayor in Australia who was preparing a defamation lawsuit because someone, I believe, asked ChatGPT about him, and it had some hallucinations, to put it politely, and said some things that were definitely not true. And that's potentially a big name. That's not just me, some random guy on the internet, and that's a politician.
Yeah.
So that can have huge effects.
Yeah, it accused that politician of, I think, embezzlement. So there's another ethical issue that we need to wrestle with and resolve. We probably won't resolve it here in the next couple minutes, though.
No, but it's definitely something to consider. And the copyright thing you brought up recently, one of the interesting things that I learned out of copyright and AI is, so with this ruling, the judge said that something just generated by AI can't be copyrighted because it didn't have a direct human hand in its creation. So then you brought up the idea of, well, maybe if the art is modified a bit, maybe a template is given and someone went over and painted it, that brings up the further questions. But if I were just to go into Midjourney, create a really nice Van Gogh-esque art and say, give me money, well, that probably wouldn't be copyrighted because I didn't really do anything.
Right, exactly.
But in the last few minutes, why don't you tell us more about your upcoming book, Confident Data Science? because it comes out pretty soon, I believe, right?
It does. In most of the world, it comes out September 4, and in North America, United States and Canada, it comes out September 22nd, I believe. So you can pre-order now on Amazon, and I see the link has been shared multiple times. So please do get that book. I recommend it. I truly do recommend this book to anybody who is currently a data scientist, who works with data scientists, or who is thinking about becoming a data scientist. And I'll tell you one other thing. There's 3 major sections. The first major section is called Getting Oriented. Getting Oriented includes a chapter on the flavors of analysis or the genres of analysis, ethics, culture, and then also the data science process. That's part 1, Getting Oriented. Part 2 is called Getting Going. That's data exploration, data manipulation and preparation, data science examples, and then also a weekend crash course on sentiment analysis. So if you're looking at sentiment analysis, there's a chapter on that. And then part 3 is called Getting Value. So getting oriented, getting going, and getting value. The getting value section is primarily about generating value for clients with data science.
No, it sounds like good topics, and it sounds like you alluded to this before, of rewriting the history of AI, but also rewriting how you go about AI in a way of, you know these frameworks, you know these tools, but here's how to do it with confidence in mind, and starting from the ground up with ethical responsibility, which
Exactly.
honestly, that's something they should have been teaching you from the start, but
Yes.
unfortunately, that's not always the case. But it's never too late to go in and learn about the ethical side of things.
Yes. Well,
But
thanks for having me, Alex. This was fantastic.
thank you so much, Adam. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. It sounds like our readers, or viewers, sorry, were engaged as well.
Yes.
And
I
if
see a few
anybody,
comments we may have to
yeah,
circle back to in the comments.
yeah, so that chat will be open in LinkedIn, so we can always go in and just respond directly there. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much, Adam, for taking the time out of your day to talk to our community. And again, check out his book. It comes out pretty soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, bye now.
Bye-bye.